Anyway,
God.
so yeah, I mean it's crazy. You have to be indoctrinated to be annealed, so to speak, to be forged into a weapon and to be forged into somebody who's competent to fight in, what somebody said something about war recently where it's where insanity actually becomes material, where you could reach out and touch insanity. Like that's what war is on a certain level. Does that make sense?
To a certain degree, right? Because it's absurdity in practice, right? And we're going to take all of this men and material and just potentially destroy it all,
Bash it against each other.
For objectives that will quickly change the moment they make contact with the enemy, right? So,
Sure.
some nebulous ideas, right, that are just going to run into an opposing force, and we're going to find some kind of consensus, right? Like at the end of it. What did Karl von Clausewitz say, right? Like war is diplomacy through other means. Right?
Yeah.
So it's trying to find some kind of common ground in between through the medium of violence, right? And if that isn't adjacent or some kind of definition of insanity, I'm not entirely sure what is.
Yeah, that's true.
So
I suppose that's true. One of the craziest ideas is back in the day when you used to be able to buy your billet as not your billet, but your commission as an officer.
Right.
And the worst cases of that was, in essence, the Battle of Sebastopol, the charge of the Light Brigade.
Oh.
And during the Russian-Turkish War, right? If I'm not mistaken, the Brits were part of that. And it was just people that didn't know what they were doing, sending people to die, other people to die, for crazy tactics that didn't make any sort of sense.
yeah. So you don't really hear about it much anymore. But like one of the, we were talking about Dante Alighieri.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Right up here. Like, the Commedia, the Divine Comedy, right? Inferno, Purgatory, Paradiso. Like, one of the things that comes up a lot is like one of the worst things you can do for Dante and like medieval like thinkers of his time, everything too, was the idea of like simony, the sin of simony, right? Which is selling church offices.
Oh,
Okay.
Right. So you don't really hear it much anymore, but like back then it was a really, really big deal, right? Because the papacy was a lot more politically charged. They were trying to control things in Italy and everything. And ultimately, his conclusion and what happens is that when you sell offices, right, be it a cardinal, a priest, whatever, right, you effectively erode the institution, right? Because not only, like, well, who are you going to sell them to? People that you like, probably, right? And people are going to give you money. So you're putting in people who are not qualified, and you're putting in basically political favors for people who are supposed to be of God, of the cloth, who a lot of them are supposed to have vows of poverty, stuff like that too. We're doing the exact opposite. Military, it's the same thing, right? You have people who are effectively buying these commissions and everything too, who have no business like doing any of this stuff, right? I had to, I was thinking about this the other day. Like I had to put up my hand at least 4 or 5 different times to get where I was in the Army. Like a press gang didn't show up at my house and like kick the door in or anything, right? Like I'd be like, I want to join the Army. I'd be like, okay. Well, I want to be an officer. Put your arm up. Well, I want to be a paratrooper. Put your arm up for that. Well, I want to, go to Ranger School. Put your arm up for that, right? Like I chose my path, like very much so, right? Like it wasn't chosen for me, right? Like it wasn't put into this space because I was incompetent or anything too. Like you can see why they ran into the trouble that they did when you have enough of that, right? When you have people who, through money or political motivation, wind up in positions of command, right? Which is terrifying.
yeah, it is terrifying.
Yeah.
So you're a history buff, sounds like, especially for World War II and such. I love World War II.
I read too much and I just have a lot of opinions. That's all it is.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, but the fact is your opinions are actually based on what you've read and know, unlike a lot of people's opinions that are just based on scratching their butt in the morning.
So obviously warfare has changed over time with technology, the evolution of what's happened, that I think we could clearly, some of the weapons we have today, we didn't have during World War II or World War I, where everybody's fighting in the trenches. From a psychological perspective, and even, from your own perspective, why do you think, like, the World War II generation, I'm sure guys had PTSD. I'm sure they had a lot of their issues, but why wasn't that more mainstream or prevalent out in the open back then versus now? Because do you think it has to do with the fact, like, maybe did they feel it was more righteous that they were there, like, back then? Because clearly, I mean, let's be honest, other than 9/11, did anybody really want to go to Afghanistan or go to Iraq or wherever else to fight these wars?
Well, I had been trying to figure out a way to get over there for a free trip for a while, and then went.
Well, admittedly, he comes from Mississippi, folks.
Yeah.
Like, anyway to get out of there.
He just wanted to see the poppy fields.
Yes.
There's so you had said something that kind of prompted me about and we may have to edit here, actually, because I kind of lost your question, everything, with my silly little joke there.
No.
Oh, no big deal.
We're not going to edit any of this.
It's terrible. Your question was, can you rephrase it again? Because there was something in there I really liked that I wanted to.
Well, I was just saying, I would believe that the World War II generation had PTSD as well, but was it because it was more of a righteous effort in the sense that they were saving the Jews, they were saving Europe from, the atrocities of the Germans at the time? And I'm not saying the German people, obviously it was Hitler and the individuals under him.
Like, there was a calling, there was a crusader aspect to it.
Right. Versus like today, where you were sent over to Afghanistan, some guys are in Iraq, and, a lot of that, maybe
corporate profit or whatever.
Yeah.
Else,
okay. So there. Yeah. Okay. I'll try to answer it in order. But there's a lot of parts to that, and it's very complex. But yes, they did have PTSD and World War II. They called it battle fatigue. World War I, it was shell shock.
Okay.
Right? So there were guys that suffered from this stuff too. A couple of things that go into it. One, mortality rates for battle were a lot higher. So the guys who were experiencing frontline combat in World War I, there was a higher chance that they didn't make it back.
Sure.
So there weren't as many people to experience it, right? Percentage-wise. I mean, raw number, I'm sure there were a lot of them and everything, but we have a very high survival rate for people who get injured in the field now, right? Like, if they're actually, it's like 97, 98%, right? Like, it's very, very high. Because we've gotten very good at medevac, CASEVAC, and stuff like that. Back then, they didn't have that. So there's that one piece of it. Two, the series of interconnected conflicts that we call World War II, right, has kind of suffered throughout history of us always retelling it, talking about it, and repackaging it as a just war. For the people in it, and at the time, on both sides, the outcome was anything but certain, right? And the idea that this was a just war, nobody was ready for World War II. Even the Germans were not ready for World War II, at least not in the way that it panned out. Right, exactly, right? Like, so Hitler, September 1st, 1939, him and his high command and everything too, they did not expect England to declare war on them when they crossed the border. They absolutely they gambled and lost there. Hitler famously apparently turned around that day, and was like, what do we do now? To his advisors and everything too, because he had not planned for this, right? So World War II unfolded in a way that just nobody was expecting. So, and then from there, it has kind of, through the generations, turned into a just war. So then if it is a just war, then we won, then we are just, and the people who fought it were just, so they can't have any misgivings about it, right? So I think the personal story for a lot of the soldiers, the PTSD, the things that they went through, kind of gets lost in that a little bit. This idea of the noble war, which it was absolutely not. War is brutal and terrible. In World War II especially, this is one of the few wars, like World War II really diverges to, and it becomes a total war, a war that we are going to fight for the unconditional surrender of two major powers.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to absolutely force them into the ground. Prior to that, and even after that, the majority of wars fought throughout human history have fought for usually territorial disputes.
Yeah.
They're usually fought through some limited economic gain or some kind of diplomatic thing we're trying to do. They're not to extinguish another state. Like World War II stands alone, kind of there. Even right now, the stuff that we're having right now is effectively territorial stuff. Right? Like this belongs to me. We're supposed to have it. I'm going to take it. You don't belong here. Right? From whichever side, whatever stance you want to take. Right? That's effectively like no one is trying to completely extinguish a state. Right?
Yeah, because
Roman Carthage, I guess, would be another where there's natural extinguishing of a state, so to speak.
And then you can make a, you know, and you know, a lot of people know Carthage was a colony. The most successful colony of Tyre, right? But it wasn't the entirety of the Phoenician culture,
right?
Like World War II is really stands on its own, like as its own thing with how wars are prosecuted. So,
yeah, and to your point, I think a lot of individuals forget that supposedly we didn't know about the concentration camps until later.
Right. Well, especially, you know, Allied troops and everything too.
Right.
You know, this is something that has been mulled over by people who are much more well-read and educated than I am too, who specialize in this subject too. Like who knew when on the Allied side there were Poland for quite some time. Their government in exile and some of their officers and agents and everything were really trying to raise the alarm on this for a while, you know, earlier in the war. So, I mean, you know, in it, I think it was such a monstrous act that it defied belief until you were standing right in front of it.
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing too.
Well, and then I think what's not really talked about either was, and I love Japan, but the atrocities in China that they committed as well.
Of course. No, I mean, look, you know, history, of course, is written by the victor, and I'm not saying that like, you know, oh, we need to talk about the good things that Japan did, or like the, you know, like I'm not taking it there, but I'm saying that the focus tends to be on the Western front.
Right.
How many times have we told the story of D-Day and everything too? And this is really a global conflict.
Right.
The bulk of World War II, I think it's something like 70-80% of the men and material expenditure was on the Eastern front.
Yeah, exactly.
It's effective.
This should be the German-Russian War.
It's effectively the German-Russian War with other things happening.
Yeah, America had like a little, and we're wagging the dog here.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. You know, and it's Mussolini killed, we don't even know how many people in Africa.
Yeah.
Right? Like it, you know, throughout the colonies and everything there. Like it just, the interwar years in Russia for the purges for Stalin, we're not entirely sure there too, right? Like engineered famines and stuff like that too. There was
in Ukraine under Stalin, right?
There were allegations of engineered famine in India under the British too, right? There was a lot of things that happened too, and we do ourselves a disservice when we keep telling the story of like D-Day and then crossing the Rhine, you know, and just over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So much other stuff that happened too. And we're still feeling the effects of all of it, right? That's the most significant thing that has happened in the past several hundred years, right? And we're still feeling the ripples in the pond after that.
Yeah. So let's go a little off the rails here.
Oh, yeah, because we've been totally tame so far. Absolutely.
I thought I was already off the rail.
On this crazy train. Go ahead.
So Hitler.
Oh, boy.
Did he go to South America?
Did he get it? Oh, no. I highly, highly doubt that. I mean, the way in which Berlin was surrounded by the Red Army and everything, and just the level of just man and material they threw at that, like it's slim to nil, you know.
The Red Army, come on, bunch of peasants in the T-72s or call those
34s,
34s, whatever.
Because there was that, I saw it recently somewhere on the interwebs, of course. It was showing that when they did the DNA analysis and the jaw and everything, they said it was actually a woman's body, not Hitler's body.
The one in the bunker? Well, it might have been Eva Braun's body, but I just remember it's so funny, and I'm probably going to get flack for this, but I'm a massive player of Red Alert, the Command and Conquer, and they have the Russian troops as per usual. They have they take some shots at the Russians in terms of
extra crispy,
goofing off, say the Tesla troopers and such. But they have one guy who's like, it's just the entire massive invasion gets destroyed. They're invading like these Japanese gardens, and there's one guy and a bear. and you and your bear have to go and take over the entirety of the thing and call in the extra Russian troops and so on. And the bear every once in a while goes, "Rrr," and the Russian trooper goes, "You are very moody for bear." And I was like, this is exactly what it must have been like in Berlin. I mean, exactly.
Oh my God.
So yeah, I dare say Hitler did leave. He was clearly in South America. There's no question.
No, yeah.
And Martin Bormann too.
No,
I think.
They're all holding hands. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
You are very moody for American.
I always played as the Russians because the Tesla coils were the best in Command and Conquer.
Absolutely. Yeah. the guy with the he had what did he have? He had like this noxious gas, like some kind of a horrible like the nuclear slag, and he had like one of those things where you basically have a de-pest your plants with it. And he's like,
it's a little spray.
Silent spring, and it's just horrible puns and wonderful things. So yeah, we're going right off the rails here.
Oh yeah,
but well, I mean, I think you can't debate the fact that Eichmann made it to South America. You could clearly say, I think you can clearly say Mengele made it.
Oh, really? Mengele was actually caught in
Brazil, I thought, wasn't it? By his own granddaughter.
He was. Like that. I thought, if I remember correctly, I'm sure someone will actually absolutely know this, but like there was an animal that was injured. There was an animal that was injured in some kind of farming accident or something. He basically performed roadside surgery on the thing, and they're like, that guy has that. Who is this? And that, put the mark on his back and everything. So, very possibly. And so, I mean, there's areas of Brazil that and Argentina.
Oh, it's mostly Argentina. Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, so, is it so far fetched to imagine, like they say that?
And especially when you look at when we brought over von Braun and all the scientists, the U.S., like obviously, why were they all granted this clemency and we gave them the ability to run NASA and such?
So what I was saying earlier about like, we do ourselves a disservice when we keep telling the story about the Western Front. The Western Front. We talk about Germany, talk about Germany. Fully, like in the 1930s, right? Fully, like almost a third of the world, it flipped to fascist ideology, right? Like, where are the stories about Franco's Spain, right? Who continues to go with this well into the 1970s, right? Like other places too, like Germany was not the only place touched by this really dangerous ideology.
Absolutely,
and we're seeing like second and third wave like fascist, like post-colonial fascism. We're seeing like modern day stuff too. There's a fantastic professor at NYU. Her name is Ruth Ben-Giat, right? She specializes on studies in fascism too, particularly Italian fascism under Mussolini and everything. But she goes all the way up to present day stuff too, or more recent, like with Berlusconi and stuff like that too, like how he ran his media empire and everything too, and how the different waves of it work and how it's all interconnected. Like even Omar Gaddafi, right? Like with
Muammar Gaddafi.
Yeah. Omar, I'm sorry, Omar Gaddafi. Like his, his anti-colonial version of fascism too. Like the interconnectedness of it all too is really interesting.
Well, they even talk about that in Iraq, right? It's like under Saddam, at least things were stable. I'm not saying he was a good person. I'm not saying there was atrocities he committed, but the children knew they were going to school. Just don't talk about Saddam that day.
Yeah, these really authoritative, autocratic style governments, everything too. They always, not always, but like they tend to have like an early period of stability, right? Because everything is like getting consolidated.
Not only stability, but thriving. I mean, they tout Hitler in the first couple of years of, coming up with the Volkswagen and the Autobahn and all of the things that were major pluses that they talked about there that made society better.
Yeah, and then we get to see the dark side of it later too, is the consolidation of power and the decision making under one person like quickly runs off the rails, So
would you argue at this point, it seems like socialism / fascism seems to be making a comeback in ideology around the world?
So fascism, I would say autocracy. Yeah, fascism really has like a very, very narrow definition because it requires well, obviously like authoritative leanings and everything, right? But
like militaristic.
It requires it requires like Trump, right? Like President Trump with his or soon to be again former and soon to be president.
Once and future president.
Yeah, I get it.
Much like King Arthur. Yes, yeah, absolutely.
He, they throw around, he's a fascist, and everything too, and it's like, well, he certainly has authoritative leanings for sure, but the actual book definition of fascism, does he control the media? No, he does not fully
clearly.
Yeah, does he have a paramilitary organization at his beck and call? No, like we don't see anything like the SA or brown shirts or anything like that. We don't, we don't have like this Republican Guard or anything underneath them. No, but like, is he an autocrat? Absolutely. Like, is he? And autocracy, right? Like people that tends to crop up, from my reading and my thinking about the subject, tends to crop up when people are very unhappy. Tends to be fertile ground for it. And the more unhappy and the more desperate, the more it is fertile ground for reactionary politics. Oh, you're upset about X? We're more upset about X, and we're going to fix it. Like, oh, you're upset about Y? I'm even more upset about you should vote for me. These guys aren't doing anything about Y.
Sure.
And then that person can just...
And it's a lovely broad brush sort of thing that can get... So this is an interesting thing because I read Ian Kershaw's double... book on Hitler, which I think is still probably holds up as probably the best biography on him. And it shows you that Hitler was, for quite some time, especially in his early days before the putsch and all of that stuff, a socialist.
Well, that's actually the party. Like,
they're the socialists.
So it's funny because a lot of the things that you see later on, and even in the recent years, was, well, no, socialism is the answer, and a lot of the things. And he said, well, Hitler was actually a leftist, not a rightist. Mussolini was a rightist. Yeah. In that sense, if you want to think about fascism as right side politics and socialism, or communism as left side, but then it was, initially that you had people that had diametrically different ideas working together. Yeah. To a common purpose. That common purpose was not good, obviously, is, world domination being what it was. But you had a very right wing in Mussolini and Franco, I would say, and a very left wing in Hitler and Stalin. Yeah. And we, for whatever level that's not painted accurately these days, I think they want to paint Hitler as very right wing and Stalin as very left wing, or the communist machine, so to speak, as very left wing. And it's just not what it was historically. But
you can have left wing and authoritative leanings. Like they're not mutually exclusive. Right? There seems to be this idea that it's on a continuum, really. But like I would take that continuum and bend it into a circle.
Absolutely. Yeah. That would make way more sense. So they're actually very common here. So what's on the other side of the circle then?
Utopian democracy, like style. Yeah.
Or it would be, middle of the road.
Representative Rome's Republic, as incorrectly remembered as that probably is, it's like this ideal way to run a government, because the Roman Republic had a lot of issues,
couple.
even Virgil, we were talking about Dante Alighieri and the whole idea of the Inferno.
His tour guide.
And his tour guide, Virgil. But Virgil, in his own sense, had his own leanings at that time.
Well, it was absolutely nationalist.
Virgil was a very MAGA guy, or Mara, maybe, make Rome great again. But that was interesting. And we've had those in many respects. People that sort of look back with this fondness on something and try to recreate it in a modern sense.
Right.
Bit of escapism there sometimes.
Yeah, and that's I brought her up before, but Professor Giat, she talks about
Well, I have to try to put that in the links. About
I highly recommend her lectures and her books and everything. But she talks about with the rightening, like reactionary politics, like the rightening, the rise of authoritarianism, everything too. There's this idea of like a better before time, right? If we need to just make things the way that they were, and things have changed now, and you don't like X, I don't like X, and that time is always misremembered too. And in my readings about, the Roman Revolution, as it's called by scholars, as like the Republic transitions into the Principate, right? Like as they become like imperial Rome and everything too. You have, Caesar Augustus, takes over. And a lot of his stuff is like this return to like Roman values and everything too, that are so far back that no one alive remembers a lot of that stuff. And he's trying to return, but a lot of it is a reaction to, Antony and Cleopatra, right? Who he is still dealing with the residual, civil war right after Caesar's death, and Julius Caesar after his death. He's othering them. He's showing this is a foreign. They're Eastern. They're not true Romans like us and everything too. So how much of that is real? How much of that is politicking, right? And it feels very much like this return to the before time. We're the conservative true, and we need to push out the other. And I'm like, wow, if that tactic is very old.
It's very old, and it's very heavily repeated.
Yeah.
In many respects. Or, and I would say, and I think it was brought up by, or shown by Mao very clearly in his revolution of like, forget about everything that happened before. We're going to whitewash it all.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a brand new thing that's, because nothing else matters. And what you find is, so that's a callback to go back to your roots. This is a complete cutting of all roots. What you find is people go crazy when that happens.
Yeah.
And they just kill everybody. Because once you're cut from your moorings of what defines you as a culture, as a society, as a this and that, you have nothing to call back to. So it's like, it's all fair game now. We're starting to whitewash, right? So what keeps it from being the purge?
Yeah.
Then,
Yeah.
or because literally there were purges, right? So
Yeah.
what the movie's based off of in a certain sense. Every time you try to create something completely new and people tend to disagree with you, well, what do you do with those people?
Oh, we just put them over there.
Yeah, in Deadland.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting.
No, very good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So how does this all relate back to men becoming better men?
Well, I feel like we've talked about a billion different topics on like what not to do.
Right. So any thoughts on what to do? Have you read or experienced or been taught any modalities that you like, that you've really gravitated towards, that said, hey, listen, this seems like a really good way of moving towards that path?
Not really that I've read anything on it, because there's a lot of noise in the space. There's a lot of noise in the space because a lot of people are trying to sell you something.
Sure.
Right. And there's a lot of guys I feel that are lacking in purpose. Maybe they feel a little bit rudderless with like what's going on, where they should take their lives, what they should do. A lot of traditional values have, they've broadened, they've changed and stuff too. There isn't like a stereotypical man, like American man supposed to be like, like you can't, what does that guy look like in a lineup? It's hard to describe. So I think the biggest thing, and I had to deal with this, I was laid off, divorced, and my father passed at roughly the same time.
Oof.
Right? Yeah, the trade, right? And, it was one of the worst things I think for a guy, right? Like in our society is to not have a purpose, right? To really just be adrift and everything too. And I think, leaving the military, like I felt that for a little bit. And then when that happened too, I really felt it. Didn't have a job, was out of the military, right? Father had passed, gone through a divorce, all that too, right? Like it's just, well, what's going on? What do I do? Focusing on a thing that you do, right? Whether it's, so you're a firefighter, be the best firefighter that you can be. Get into whatever stupid hobby, right? Like it doesn't matter what it is.
Like podcasting, for instance.
There you go, right? Like be the best.
Stupid hobby.
Be the best podcaster you can be. And this is
We're trying, man. We're trying.
This is going to sound, kind of trite, but like it all the other stuff will come. All the other stuff will come, right? When you have purpose, when you have a direction, right? Like our dreams ultimately are stupid, right? They're just that. They're just dreams, right? But what's important is the direction and the drive, right? When you have direction and drive, there you go, right? It's you're going somewhere, you're doing a thing, and things will come along the way, right? Like I think that's the most important piece, right? I didn't set out to do what I do now within the medical field and everything, but I'm on the path and I'm trying to do the absolute best that I can, right? And it gives me purpose every single day. I have 2 kids who are a challenge. I love them very much, but they're my daughter's 4.5 going on, 18, and everything I do is wrong, but giving her the best life, that's a purpose, that's a direction, and I think if men have that, right? Like young men point themselves towards that, and the military is more than happy to give you purpose and direction.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So if you don't know what you're doing,
run that way. Don't mind the bullets.
Go to your local recruiter and fill you with purpose. I think that's it. I think that's as simple as that is. I think that's the recipe.
Yeah, I feel like in today's society, a lot of people feel like they don't have a purpose. And I think that could be detrimental, clearly.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Especially to your mental health. A person without any kind of purpose is just lost in the sauce, and they're out there in space, right? And from that perspective, as you alluded to earlier, I guess one of your modalities is just writing down on Post-it notes gratitude and positive thoughts, and clearly that's helping, just one of your coping mechanisms, but also something that puts out positive vibes into your daily routines and the universe, and bring positive change and energy into the mix.
Yeah. And a thing that, well said, a thing that I always have to remind myself of too, coming from the military, we almost have like a zero defect mentality, which is just ultimately not healthy for everyday life. But everyone gets up every day and tries their best. Even the person that cuts you off, even the person, your wife that yells at you when she's upset or whatever too, they didn't get up with that being their express purpose, right? So just understanding that everyone is generally trying their best, like even if they're being terrible in the moment,
That's a great way to think about it, because it really puts into perspective the fact that, nobody's out to mess your life up, per se.
Yeah.
And most people that are doing that, or let's say you get yelled at by your wife or your sister, your mother, whatever it is, or I'm not just demonizing women here, I'm just saying, or your father, or whoever it is, your boss. 99.99% of the reason he's yelling at you or she's yelling at you is because of what they have going on that day.
Yeah.
And you just, on what level, stepped on some trigger that is triggering them. Now we're coming upon a bugaboo of mine
Yeah.
because I'm very annoyed and like Peter Griffin, you know what really grinds my gears?
I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Exactly. Is the lack. There's a dual thing that's happening, and I'm not trying to bright line this because that's an easy thing to do, and I think it's wrong. There's an easy thing. There's a thing happening in society these days of two things. One is entitlement, and the other one is complete abrogation of personal responsibility.
Yeah.
And it's like one of these kinds of things of like, I'm triggered, and because I'm triggered, it's your problem to make me not triggered, whether it's definition of safe spaces and all this stuff. And again, I'm not being reactionary because I think these things can be good, right? Safe spaces can be good as an idea, as a place of respite, as a place of resetting your mind, but you can't live there.
Right.
And you can't force others to adapt to your failings. It's not failings, but malfunctions. I don't know what to call it exactly. Of abilities to not cope, and then how does society sort of coddle you into this bubble wrap and put you out to pasture rather than doing that? So that versus the Nicholas Talibi, the being anti-fragile, and the fact that we actually get stronger by having adversity. Can't be too much adversity because then you break down, but just enough adversity, like in the military, I guess, to build you up into some other things. Thoughts?
Well, it's definitely interesting, right? Because like the idea of personal choice, freedom, self-agency and everything, to defining your boundaries within society, this is all back to the French Revolution, right? Like we're all trying to figure out where we exist within, this society. Like where do you end and I begin, and it does not fall within the state to define everything, right? So we have a lot of this is cultural. A lot of this is, very much in the moment, like right now, trying to figure it all out. At the end of the day, no, very few people care about, let alone like what you think and feel. Right? Not because they don't like you or they don't, like you're a bad person or anything like that. Like they're too wrapped up in their own stuff to even consider all that and everything too. So a lot of it I see is a projection of like self-determination and agency in a world where everything feels nebulous. Like they're trying to go like, I want to control this because this is that. This is me trying to find a boundary in an uncertain place. And we do live in an uncertain world, right? We're talking about drones earlier, like the drones over New Jersey and everything too. What's the threat of the drones? Well, it's this existential crisis that we don't exactly control that may have some agency over me, and I don't like it. Like that's effectively what it really represents. Not that, the drone has a steak knife and it's going to fly into your head. Like that's not going to happen. Right. So why
have forks?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Sports.
Thanks.
I'm
just trying to eat a steak.
So this is everybody trying to figure out where they are, where they stand, where their boundaries are, trying to get like a little bit of agency. And I think if we treat other people like that, with, hey, that's the approach that they're taking, and be patient and understanding, I think that's the best, because ultimately, even the most in your face, you will address me as this, and like this is how, I'm the political correctness police and everything too. That person still has to get a job. That person still has to like pay their bills and everything too. They still have to cooperate with other people, everything too. And I think it's easy to focus on the loudest voices in the wilderness and extrapolate that out to everybody. But I don't think the bulk of people are like that. Like who's
on either side, really.
Yeah.
And that's really the main point, right?
Yeah.
It's not, we're yelling across, whether it's social media or other stuff, polarizing everybody to, well, you must be Attila the Hun because you think Trump should get reelected. Oh, you must be the most, flower child of the star seeds because you think that DEI is the best thing.
One line is not a real place.
Yeah.
How many people are like that on your street? Percentage-wise, how many people are like that on your street? Hardly any, probably zero, right? How many people are like that in your town? Not many, right? So again, these are the loudest voices in the wilderness with a lot of this stuff too. And we get fed a lot of outrage, reactionary content by the algorithms that are on these social media platforms, which other than watching this podcast, you should delete all your social media.
That's right.
That's the best thing you can do for your self-determination and your agency and your mental health, right? Like, none of that stuff is good for you. It's my own personal plug here. I don't have any of that stuff. I just, why argue with strangers over the internet? Over something you're both wrong about? Yeah. Like, ultimately, it's not worth it.
I think that's the interesting thing. There's so many keyboard warriors out there, and clearly there's cyberbullying nowadays, and kids are affected by that. You start getting these comments or whatever else on forums and everywhere else on posts, and it's just like, it's amazing how people become so irate and outraged over somebody's comment, and it's just like, who cares? It's like one person writing on the internet, and they're just trolling you. And yet you're going to let this bother you and affect your day, and you're going to go out and kick somebody's dog or do something terrible. And it's just like, for what?
But anytime you get upset, right? Like, you get that angry that no one is actually making you upset. You're allowing yourself to get that upset over what, words?
Right.
Who's somebody who does stuff like that too. Think of like how miserable their day to day.
Well, that's
their minute by minute too, and you're gonna give up some of your day, your control, right, to that person. That's exactly what they want, right? Like, why would you, So imagine. I always like to try to imagine this person, someone who lives on my street. Would I give them the time of day if that's how they actually? But absolutely not. No. Right. So,
yeah. That's a fascinating perspective. And I think all too often today, I think people live on social media now with clearly OnlyFans, all these pages where it's just about, well, let's be honest, it's like people's egos, and they're just sitting there trying to just say, look at me, I'm more important than everybody else.
What's the famous quote? Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
Right. Like, the quickest way to make yourself unhappy is to compare yourself to that stuff, and again, like, you're going to question everything. You're going to lose purpose. You're going to it's just a complete detractor.
Like, so
go ahead.
So what advice would you give to somebody that is rudderless, doesn't have purpose, whether male, female, whatever, if there's, aside from maybe if they didn't want to join the military. If they didn't have necessarily a calling to go to the military, what would you give them advice as to how to figure out what their purpose is and steer that ship in the right direction?
Well, first off, to be alive right now in this country, right, and just in the western part of this world, really anywhere in this world right now, you are insanely lucky.
Yeah.
First and foremost, right? This is the absolute best time to be alive as a human. I'll tell you why. Because of about 80-90% of all the human beings who have ever humaned throughout history, you know what their occupation has been? Subsistence farmer. Like,
yeah.
So all these people, they're just like, oh, like, I remember all my past lives, and I've been reincarnated, and I was a pharaoh, and then I was, this nobleman, and I was that. Well, that's remarkable, because it should have been, I was a farmer, and then I was another farmer, and then one time I was a farmer, followed by another farmer, and then the background just changes behind them. Like, because, and then think of the life of a subsistence farmer who's trying to, like, fend off starvation, who never gets to go to school, doesn't get to participate in any kind of war, doesn't get to, have any of these major historical events happen around them. People show up and take stuff from you at sword point, either bandits or, like, legitimized government taking taxes from your crop. Doesn't matter to you.
That's still happening.
You're still losing. You're still losing stuff.
Nothing's changed on that front.
What I'm saying is that, like, you have all that, and that's a huge leg up. Like, that's amazing right there. Like, that in and of itself. And this goes to the gratitude piece, right? So just having that is incredible. And then from there, you have the luxury of actually making a job out of stuff that is fun. You want to be the world's foremost expert at throwing cards in a hat? Like, I'm sure there's a tournament for that somewhere. You could be like the top end person. I mean, competitive esports is a thing, right? It's incredible. So if you have the luxury where you can take a thing and take it to its utmost, and you can probably make a career out of it. And even if you're not the best at it, you could talk about it. Like you could be a commentator, or you could become an expert and give your opinion on that field or whatever. Like there's so much that you can do. So take something that you love and are passionate about and hang your hat on that. Like lean into that. Take it as far as you can and really stick with it too. One, that'll be a test to see, do you really love it, right? Like if you're willing to basically wake up and go to bed with it every single night. And two, like if it does indeed pass that test, like there's your ticket right there.
Well, we're hoping this is it for us, but
yeah, because even I think like even Joe Rogan, right? I think Dana White, when the UFC was struggling, he approached Joe Rogan and was like, "Hey, we see you talk about the UFC. If you're really into this," and Rogan was like, "Wait, so you want me to come on and just sit ringside with the best seats in the world and talk about UFC?
Talk about the thing I love."
He's like, "I'm doing this."
Yeah,
and I think he did like 13 UFCs for free because he's just like, this is freaking awesome.
Yep.
So, that's truly where I think if you find the things you love and you're passionate about, which I feel like most people today don't. Let's be honest. I think everybody going to work for the most part just kind of goes through the motions. They're not really necessarily passionate about it.
Yeah, they call it driving to work, not driving to fun, right?
Right. Yeah. But going back to your point, so, with the whole changing the scenery, everybody's slavery. So in your opinion, then, civilization today, you think is more advanced than it has been? Because
absolutely. Yeah.
So if we go back to the pyramids, we go back to some of the ancient times, do you think consciousness and people had a higher level back then versus now?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I don't. Because the idea of like self-determination and like us as like, individual people and everything, that's fairly recent. Right? That's a pretty recent invention.
At least in this go around of humanity.
Well, I mean, if we're going to, we're invoking Madame Blavatsky and her theosophy stuff. Is that we're going to get into like, let's get Robert Howard out here with Lemuria too while we're at it.
Did he invent that, or was that something that he attributed?
I was looking that up, but like he definitely throws in Atlantis too, and that
Hyboria.
And that definitely goes all the way back to it was Plato. Talked about that, but Lemuria I think is more recent, right? Like that's a more recent invention. Like I don't think it goes back to any.
Really?
Yeah, I believe so. I could be wrong. I'm sure somebody will point it out, but
the keyboard warriors might. Not that we're calling our listeners keyboard warriors, but not at all. I mean, I think, that's the interesting thing because some of our podcasts, we've talked about the young Adrias.
Yes.
Like you look at ancient civilization, the fact that they think the pyramids were built with, hammers and basically copper tools or whatever else.
So I talked about this with Nick, and he actually read this whole thing on pyramids and other things. It's a very orthodox narrative. It's like the orthodox narrative of whatever. It's just it's an apologetics sort of polemic on how it's not anything that's unexpected, and it's exactly.
Because we focus on pyramids and everything, right? Because we're just like, they're so interesting, and like, what's actually harder from an architectural and like stone cutting standpoint is the obelisk. Actually, creating and raising an obelisk and like cutting a single piece like that, some of which are still standing, by the way. Like 4,600 years after the fact, right?
Right.
It is way harder to actually do that than it is to build a pyramid, right? And the majority of the pyramids were made within a pretty short period of time, relatively speaking. So through the reigns of a couple of pharaohs, like Sneferu and his son Khufu were the two that outside of Giza like made the majority of those. And you kind of see the progression in their architectural style. You have step pyramids, right? And then eventually There's a bowed pyramid too, where they had to kind of really cut the amount that they were putting up top because the foundation couldn't support it all.
You see, that's the whole point, isn't it? It's because they didn't have the technology anymore that they got from the Anunnaki and all the aliens that allowed them to.
There you go.
Agree to disagree. I hate to do this, but is there any chance I can get a bathroom break?
Yeah, we got about 10 minutes left.
Oh, okay.
We're all set. So
Yeah.
Can you hang on for?
I'll do my best.
Do your best, me too, dude. I want to pee myself right now.
Like all this coffee and water.
I know.
So unprofessional.
So
Gotta stay hydrated.
yes,
It's like that's the important thing. Keep drinking, people. Water, that is.
water. Yes,
We're not condoning alcohol.
drinking, people.
With the holidays coming up, you never know. But
Yeah, absolutely.
okay, so you posit that the
That
pyramids,
word was coming out.
your favorite word. So, okay,
Good.
like he doesn't believe.
He's not a believer.
All right.
Not a believer. That Mac.
Yeah, very, very rigid. Sorry, guys.
Well, nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
We could all be rigid sometimes.
So how do you feel about the sort of bathtub remnants of what was clearly water at that point that had that are displayed on the Sphinx and other things that show that, or some people say show that there was a river that crossed that way, and it wouldn't have been a river for a much older period than what they're ascribed to have been built from.
I would ask what the carbon dating is on some of the stones and everything too, and then also too you have to think about ancient Egyptian culture too. Like all this stuff was made during the old kingdom, right? Like the initial period of.
You talking about the Giza pyramids or the other pyramids?
No, the Giza pyramids.
Yeah.
They're all made around the same time. So they're
Agree to disagree.
they were very much into taking credit for what they did, right? Like absolutely. Like you didn't make these like steles, however you want to pronounce it. They would go conquer an area. They would push into, let's say, Kush. They would go down south, right? They'd go down south the Nile. Or they would go into toward modern day Syria, Lebanon, everything. And they would go have a battle and they would erect a monument and be able to look at all the stuff that we did. They would give you dates and like who did it and everything too. And in front of the pyramids, they tell you like who built it and everything too. Like they're very much into taking credit for this stuff. So it helped legitimize the pharaoh's rule and everything too, because Egypt is ancient Egypt is a land, two lands, right? Upper and lower Nile,
Upper and lower.
right? And then even beyond that, it can fracture into the nomes beyond that too, the individual cities and everything too. So it's always trying to be held together, right? So the pharaoh was always trying to legitimize their rule. It's always trying to, and their religion too was very much like keeping people in line, keeping them cohesive, keeping everything, fracturing. So.
Well, you even see Akhenaten, which was one of the first monotheistic.
Right.
He tried to. He moved out of
They
Memphis and worship the one God, the sun god, so to speak.
Yeah.
But there were no hieroglyphics in the pyramids, and so there were no. That sort of flies in the face of that argument on some level. We don't really know. I mean, why the pyramids were the way they were, why they were created with those chutes, with the king's chamber, the queen's chamber, which are really just called that, I guess. I mean, I don't know where that came up, the actual verbiage for why it's a queen's chamber or a king's chamber, because nobody was buried there, and there's evidence that nobody was ever buried there.
Well, you have to remember, all of them were looted, with the exception of Tut, right? So,
right, but in the Valley of the Kings and other places, Tut wasn't found in a pyramid.
No, he wasn't. It was this antechamber, side chamber, because he died unexpectedly.
Correct.
He believed, right? So they had to very hastily give him a pharaoh's burial, and then they were on to like the next thing.
Do you believe that pyramids were made to bury pharaohs in?
Yes.
How could you believe that?
It's a belief, and I believe that.
It's a belief, and you believe it, but I'm going to agree to disagree.
I disagree as well, but that's our opinions.
disagree.
That's our opinions.
Yes.
Fair enough.
What would you say? So, being a history buff, how much knowledge did we lose with the burning of Alexandria, and also the Vatican? Clearly, in their archives, have all kinds of relics and other information they don't want us to find out.
Well, I can't really speak to the Vatican because I'm not exactly like an expert on, early Catholicism or anything like that. But with Alexandria, I just finished reading something on this recently. It's less of an actual physical library than it was almost like here, right? Like a college of science. It was really the minds that were brought together under the Ptolemies that were able to like really come there. And what they would do is they would take anybody who came in, they would take their scrolls or anything, and they would immediately transcribe them, give them the copy, and then keep the original too, which is, really class move, right?
Classy move.
But they, it was less the actual scrolls and more it as an academic center. And as power shifted away from Alexandria, away from the Ptolemaic kingdom, and like we have the rise of Rome and everything too, we get to see that sort of dissipate too. So it's kind of like this morning. So the idea of that, like it being a single structure that like burned down and like, oh, if we only had like these scrolls, like we could, I think it's less of that and more like the mourning of like this big academic center no longer being viable.
So why do you?
But they had,
obviously they had
in the archives there. Clearly.
They did.
Those are a tragedy.
Well, there were also copies, right? It's amazing as much survives as it does. The fact that we have the Iliad and the Odyssey,
right,
in pretty much its entirety. Like there's a lot of literature that survives. It's really quite amazing.
Well,
I mean, just the letters from Cicero. That's incredible that we have this correspondence from this statesman who's pivotal, right? The writings of Josephus, during his
Tacitus and
the histories of Tacitus. If we should, a lot of people are like, Alexander died so young, and everything too. Like, why do you have to die so young? What if his empire continued to? We really should be asking, how did he live as long as he did?
Yeah.
All the stuff that guy did, all the injuries he received, all the things that happened to him and everything, all the plots he survived too, right? Like, same thing with all the literature that survives too. We should be like, how did all of this survive? It's incredible how much of it actually survived. And what they wrote it on too. And with the Egyptians, thank God they wrote everything in stones.
Right.
Or that there's so much pottery that survives, or even in Mesopotamia, like your cuneiform tablets, right? That when a building burns down, they bake and they're forever.
Yep.
And now we can translate them. That's amazing.
It's just amazing throughout human history how much has been destroyed, because you look at the Spanish conquistadors, like wiped out most of the Mayan and Inca stuff, right? It's just like we've lost so much knowledge and vast records because of religion or whatever.
The iconoclastic style behavior too. And, you had it with early Christianity with, the split between East and West about like, how do we treat idols? There were some iconoclasts there. More recently too with ISIS and Syria, defacing and destroying a lot of stuff, burning down museums. That hurt, that hurt to watch, people sledgehammer monuments and statues,
And it's always this idea that it's going to be what it is. But why don't we leave it there? Because I'm sure there's wonderful more stuff to talk about, and we'd love to have you out again sometime.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Nick, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Part of things.
Yeah.
Till next time, this is Brothers of the Arcana. I am Alex Aldea.
I am Dave Ferrigno. Thank you for joining us today. God bless. And our guest,
Nick Stevens, and because it's right around Christmas time, and all that happy. So we say Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, and Happy Holidays. So
Happy Holidays, everybody. Thank you.
And until next time, see you later.
Ciao.